How's it going, everybody? Due to some scheduling difficulties, still, Matt and I weren't able to do a full episode. However, with the NBA Conference Finals, I couldn't leave you all empty handed. So, without further ado, let's get into it. In the West, we have a matchup between the Warriors and the Mavericks. And in the East, we have a matchup against the Heat and the Celtics. So, before we get into that, I'm going to talk about some of the teams that didn't quite make it to the conference finals. In the Western Conference, let's look at the Memphis Grizzlies. And, shout out to them. They had a phenomenal season. Ja really burst on the scene as a star. And, even when he went out against the Warriors, a lot of people thought, oh, well, the Grizzlies are done. The Warriors are just going to, overpower them. But then they lead by about 55 in one game. And, of course, no, not so fast. They steal a game without Ja. But, of course, the Warriors would go on to close it out. And to me, I was surprised with the point differential in that game. But the Grizzlies were 11-2 in the regular season without Ja. So they have a real complete team, and I don't think a lot of people realize that. The Grizzlies actually are building something in Memphis right now. Taylor Jenkins is a good coach, and their front office has done a great job to build a roster there. The Grizzlies could potentially be a problem for years to come, and I think this is just the beginning of what they could do. But, however, I'm going to use a term that Matt loves all too well, and I'm going to say that the Warriors just had a little bit more championship pedigree. Sorry, Matt, I had to do it to you, but they were able to get the win and move on. So would then await the winner of the Phoenix and Dallas series. And you know what? You all know, if you all know my social media pages, you know what I'm going to say. I'm going to talk about how great Luka is and this, that, or whatever. But before we get into that, I got to talk about the Suns. That was embarrassing. That is all I have to say. They went up 2-0, and of course, the infamous clip that everyone's looking at is when Devin Booker looks at the camera and says he hit the Luka special. Oh, that was the worst decision you could have made, my friend, because you woke, as if Luka wasn't already playing great, you woke up a freaking monster. And you all just would then would lose 4 of the next 5 games. So, that was a big mistake on your part, my friend. And of course, going in Game 7, I don't even have to talk about how dismal that effort looked. As said on my social media page, Spencer Dinwiddie and Luka Doncic apiece had more points than the entire Suns' big three. That means Chris Paul, DeAndre Ayton, and Devin Booker. Which brings me to my next point. I'm hearing Chris Paul get a lot of criticism from one Patrick Beverley, from other fans, from other NBA media. But where is the criticism of Devin Booker? That is what I feel like I'm missing. That is the issue I have. So, my thing is, Devin Booker was 4th in MVP voting. But yet, in Game 7, season on the line, you score 11 points. You shoot 3 of 14 from the field. 21%. That is unacceptable, especially someone that is voted in the top 5 MVP voting. If he is really supposed to be the star, I mean, of course, you all know how I feel. I feel like Chris Paul's a star, and as he goes, the Suns go. But, a lot of people view Devin Booker as a star. They view Devin Booker in the same category as Jason Tatum and Luka Doncic, which clearly, based on this series, he's not Luka Doncic. That goes without saying. Luka Doncic was the best player in the series without question. Dude was in God mode. I mean, not to sound too sacrilegious, but it's the truth. But I need to hear more criticism from Devin Booker. It's like I said earlier in the postseason. Where was the criticism on Trae Young? Trae Young scored 13 fewer points in the playoffs than he did in the regular season, and no one was criticizing him. If these guys are stars and they have these bad series, you have to criticize them. Chris Paul, yes, deserves his criticism. DeAndre Ayton deserves a little bit of criticism as well. But where is Devin Booker's criticism? If he is the name and the player that you all tell me he is, I need to start seeing this criticism. I'm not a fan of Devin Booker, I'm going to be honest. I kind of lost a little respect for him when the whole clip went viral of him complaining about being double-teamed in pickup games. Look, how I see it, I'm a 28-year-old FedEx employee, and I get double-teamed in pickup games. If I can take it, I would hope an NBA All-Star could take it. That's just how I feel about it. But I need to see more criticism on his part. But I can't say enough about the job that the Mavericks have done. I was watching, looking at Jason Kidd and the way he was calling the game, and their defensive switches were just perfect. And it was a great game plan. And of course, you're only as of course, you're only as good as your star player takes you, and Luka Doncic was by far the best player on the court. He's really emerging as a top 5 player in the league right before our eyes. And even earlier in the postseason when Jason Tatum, who I will get to here in a little bit, was starting to really come into his own and take that next step, I thought the gap was closing between Luka and Tatum as who is the best young player. But based on this series, Luka definitely spread the gap up a little bit more. So, without further ado, let's get into the Western Conference Finals. What do I think is going to happen? Well, I think without further ado, I think the Warriors take this. As much as this run that Luka Doncic and the Mavericks is on is making me happy to watch. Again, Matt, sorry I gotta do it to you, bud, but I gotta go with the championship pedigree. As much impressed as I was with the Mavs' defensive effort against the Suns, I'm going to say I don't see that working against the Warriors. I think the Warriors can space the floor out a little better. They move the ball better as a team. And, of course, I don't think you're going to absolutely look like they give up like the Suns did. The Suns looked like they absolutely just gave up in the last game of the series. You're not going to get that from Golden State. So, even though I still think at the end of the day, Luka is going to need more help if they're going to make that next step and get to a championship and eventually win a championship, Luka's going to need to have a little bit more help than what he's gotten. Jalen Brunson's had a great postseason. I expect him to get paid in the offseason if he doesn't move on. Or rather, he will get paid one way or another. And Spencer Dinwiddie really did a great job stepping up in the last game, but that has to be more consistent. And I'm going to be honest, Maxi Kleber has actually been very underrated in my opinion. But at the end of the day, I think the Warriors have too much firepower. Steph is still Steph. Clay's Clay. Draymond is Draymond. Wiggins was an all-star this year. Jordan Poole has really come into his own this postseason. So I think that, and of course, we all know the job that Steve Kerr can do as a coach. So I don't really feel like I need to say much about that. I don't think I have to say too much about that. The Warriors win the series, but I do think maybe in 5 to 6 games. So either way. So now going to the Eastern Conference, let's talk about the Philadelphia 76ers who, outside of Joel Embiid, because I say this because the Heat were able to advance the Eastern Conference Finals by knocking off the Philadelphia 76ers. The Sixers, much like the Suns, outside of Joel Embiid, they just look like they gave up. This is the difference in a lot of ways between talent and culture. I usually hear this a lot more during football season. I know Iowa State has patented this phrase when they play my Texas Longhorns, five-star recruits versus five-star culture every time they play. And this was a perfect example of that what that looks like to the NBA. Because you look at the Heat's roster, you look at the Sixers roster. The Sixers aren't deep, but of course Embiid, Harden, Maxey, some big names at the top. And then you got the Heat, whose best player was Tobias Harris at the Sixers too. I almost forgot about him for ironic reasons. But you look at the Heat's best player, and this was a guy that the Sixers chose to pay Ben Simmons and Tobias Harris over before he was able to come to Miami, and that's Jimmy Butler, a guy that only by some is viewed as a B-list All-Star until playoff time, which is the most important time to show off. And then you have, obviously Bam Adebayo, who's an All-Star, Tyler Hero, who's the sixth man of the year, and then 8 undrafted guys. So obviously on paper, the Sixers are more talented, but the Heat, just the way they're coached, the energy that they come with, it's a perfect example of talent over culture. So the Heat were able to move on, and which brings me to my next point. They were the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, but yet no NBA media was talking about them. And I think that's a joke. And I've said all season long, I'm like, I've been asking, when are y'all going to talk about him? When are y'all going to talk about him? JJ Redick talked about him. He made the good point and said, hey, we haven't even talked about the Heat, and they're the number 1 seed in the East. Well, now that they're in the conference finals, you kind of got to talk about them. And I think this is going to be a very intriguing matchup with the Celtics, which the Celtics just got out of an absolute war with the Bucks. And, of course, I got to give all the credit in the world to Giannis, because Giannis did absolutely everything he could to keep them in it. But, of course, with the loss of Middleton, he was just a little shorthanded. And the Celtics, with Jason Tatum, Brown, of course, a big performance in Game 7 by Grant Williams, in which the Celtics shot a 53 three attempts and hit 20 of them. Grant Williams shot 18 of them, which is just absolutely crazy. But yeah, the Celtics are one of the hottest teams in the league. They're the number one defensive ranked team, with the Heat being right behind them at number 2, and they're the number 2 seed in the East. So this, to me, makes for a very intriguing matchup. So you have two teams, in my opinion, that play very similarly. Both teams that are very predicated on their defense. Like I said, the number 1 and number 2 ranked defenses in the NBA. And I think, just like the series that the Celtics got out of, I think it's going to be a battle. This one goes 7 games. I think the X factors for the Heat is going to be their depth and their perimeter shooting. Can they hit the shots on the perimeter to space the floor? And can their depth eventually wear down the Celtics? The key for the Celtics, I think, is going to be point guard play. What does Derek White or Marcus Smart bring to the table? Can they take care of the ball and not allow the Heat to not get out and run in transition? And how they rebound the ball. Al Horford has almost turned back the clock in this postseason, and the health of Robert Williams is still in question. So I think their presence on the boards is going to be up for debate. So those are my X factors for the two teams. However, as for my prediction, I do think the Heat come out on top on this one, and that might be a little bit of a homer pick, and I apologize. Sorry, not sorry, but I just think the Heat. I think the Heat shoot too well. They're the number one. They were the number 1 3-point shooting team in the NBA this break in the regular season. I think that can carry over, and they can match the Celtics' defensive intensity. As good as Jason Tatum has been in the postseason, he's gonna have to go against Jimmy Butler, who can match anyone on that team's intensity. So, I think that I have the Heat in a very competitive 7-game series, heading to play the Golden State Warriors in the NBA Finals. So, without further ado, that is my wrap up of the Eastern and Western Conference Finals. As we get closer to the NBA Finals, I will do a video on my predictions there. So without further ado, I am out.